So if you could raise your hand and just let me know, or somebody raise your hand and let me know that you can actually see the poll. Okay, great. So go ahead and select your answer. This is going to help kind of figure out where we're going to go for the evening, and also just give us some opening discussion. So you're going to tell me what your primary reason for teaching language, and by language I'm referring to grammar, mechanics, conventions, all that good stuff. So which of those options is your primary reason? And if you are choosing other, there's no way for me to give you like a fill in the blank option on the poll itself. If you could just type in the chat what your other reason is, that would be really helpful to me. Yes, Grace, I probably should have anticipated that. All right, and I can't tell if everyone has answered the way I have set it up here. So if you could go ahead and raise your hand again and just let me know that you have cast your vote, that would help. Welcome, Angela. If you could, since you just jumped in with us, if you could go ahead and answer the poll question for the evening so we can get your answer counted too. All right, great. It looks, as far as I can tell, then everybody except for Nyla, unless she can't answer, has answered our poll. So before we get into any discussion, regardless of what answer you would have chosen, they are perfectly valid answers. Even the last one, which I really kind of added just as a joke because it's about that time of year. That's fine. I know sometimes the technology is fun. I had issues. I've got two computers that I use, and one of them has Windows 8 on it, and it hates me. So I decided not to use that computer tonight, so I understand. Anyway, I added the last option there mainly just as a joke, but I'm in the middle of trying to incorporate some language instruction into my classes right now, and it can definitely be a bit of a headache. So it looks like most of you are centering your language instruction around writing, or that is your main focus. And I know that we do have some teachers of English as a second language, so I will try to incorporate some of that as well. I have a ton of information packed into this presentation, and I know that there is no way that we're going to get through it. So I incorporated all of it just in case your responses varied from what I anticipated they would be. So let me just tell you that if I do not get to the section at the end that is about how to focus language grammar instruction specifically for second language learners, I will I'll probably do two things. I will have it posted on the mNET site so that you have that chunk of the PowerPoint to go back and look at, because there's a ton of information in that section. And then I can also, at Leslie's session in 2 weeks, I can actually upload that chunk of the presentation for you guys too. So at least you don't lose out on that completely. There are a bunch of files down at the bottom for you to check out. The resource handout for this evening is probably the most comprehensive. And then there are two actual grammar worksheets that are at the end. And there's a reason why I incorporated both of those. So hopefully I will get to that chunk of the presentation, so you know why I gave you a 6th grade and a 12th grade pronoun antecedent agreement worksheet. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll here so we can continue. All right. So depending on what your purpose is in approaching language instruction, it's going to affect how you go about incorporating activities, what aspects of grammar, mechanics, conventions, whatever you focus on. So I have the presentation broken into 3 chunks. The first one has to do with approaching it from the standpoint of standards, which since none of you actually chose that option, I will go through that part really quickly. Just because there are a few things about standards that you need to think about, even if you're focusing your language instruction on writing. Writing is the second one, and then teaching second language learners. And, you know, at any point that you guys want to stop and discuss or have questions, please type those in the chat. I didn't build in discussion directly into the slides, so I kind of anticipated that as we went, you guys would jump in and say, hey, can we talk about this, or ask questions. So just know that if you don't jump in and ask questions or type stuff in the chat, then I'm just going to keep going and I won't stop necessarily until we get to the end of a section. All right, so this is basically just the poll that you just took. I didn't know if I would be able to pull that up or have time to add that, so we can skip this slide. So regardless of what your reason for teaching language is, there are a certain number of challenges. And this is the topic that I have in our Coaching Corner post that I'll have you guys go and do at the end of the session. But one of the big challenges with teaching language is that for most English language arts courses, the language instruction is something that is not the central focus. It's not where most of the curriculum is focused. It is not an add-on, because that makes it seem like it is not important. And there, if you look at Common Core standards or you look at the Texas standards, there is a large section devoted just to language instruction. But if you compare it to what students are expected to do as far as literacy, as far as reading, and as far as writing, it's not as large of a component. So sometimes it gets lost in the mix. Or you get to a writing unit. If your language instruction is focused on writing, how many major papers are you really writing in, you know, a year-long course? A lot of districts and a lot of standards really just focus on 4 big papers, 1 per quarter. And you may do, you know, shorter writing throughout each quarter. You don't necessarily have those big formal papers where students are really focusing on editing and revision and getting a lot of that language instruction. So how do you fit it into the mix of everything else? So that's one big challenge. Other challenges are teacher confidence in teaching language concepts. You know, do we as teachers actually know the rules ourselves well enough that we can explain them in multiple ways to students who are really struggling to grasp those concepts? And I can tell you that even coming into teaching directly, pretty much directly out of an undergraduate degree in English, I had a minor in linguistics, and I still had quite a few challenges in figuring out how to present grammar rules to teenagers. It's extremely hard. And a lot of times our own knowledge of rules is, you know, in our head. We know it looks right, we know how to use it, but trying to explain it is a whole different ballgame. So sometimes our lack of confidence in our own knowledge makes the job more difficult. Another challenge is not knowing where to start when there are gaps in student knowledge. You know, there's always this kind of debate going on in our heads, I think, about, do we need to start at the very beginning? I feel like my students don't know anything. Do I really need to go back and review parts of speech? And that's a real debate. And even if you know, have students just like with literacy and just like with writing, your students are going to be all over the place. So you may have one group of students that needs to start with parts of speech, and another, you know, set of students that is looking at, you know, really complex, you know, manipulation of sentence structure. Time is a big challenge. How do you fit it in and still cover everything else that you need to do, especially if you've got students that are really struggling to understand the basics? Frustration with students not being able to apply. So the whole, they're doing worksheets, they're doing handouts, but I can't see it in their writing. And sometimes language instruction is just kind of boring. Not always and not to everybody, but often that is the case. So hopefully we can address some of these challenges as we go through tonight. Do you guys have any comments about these? Do you think I hit the nail on the head? Do you have any other challenges that you have run into as you've tried to incorporate language instruction into your classrooms? Yeah, Verna, that is, I think you're not alone in that. Not alone at all. Nyla, I've gotten that one too. Christina, I teach seniors too, so I understand, definitely. Well, and the gaps, that also I think relates to not knowing where to start, because if you have all of these gaps and your students are all over the place, it makes it even more complicated than trying to isolate the logical starting point, because you can't start from the beginning. All right, Victor, I see you're still typing. I'm going to go to the next slide, but students will not pay attention. Yeah, and a lot of times that is a factor when they don't understand. They don't understand how they're going to apply it, and they're struggling. All right, so something else to think about in addition to the challenges is that when you use the term teaching grammar, you've got to remember that grammar is actually a catch-all term for a lot of really different language elements. You've got form, you've got meaning, you've got pragmatics, you've got a huge difference between declarative versus procedural knowledge, and sometimes that is where the gap is too. You'll have students that, if given a writing assignment, can produce writing that is coherent and relatively clear and makes sense, not that it's error-free, but it works. But then if you ask them to go back and analyze what they actually did or how they created that writing and what the parts are, they don't have the understanding or the terms to be able to talk about how they wrote it. Language skills are multidimensional. They all kind of work together. So trying to isolate specific things is really difficult. So if you think you're going to jump in and start with, run-ons and fragments, which is something that, I'm teaching seniors, they need to be, they're supposed to have been, be fairly far along in their understanding of writing and of grammar, the big catch-all term. You can't, you jump in and it's not just looking at run-ons, and you got to go back and you got to talk about comma rules, and then you have to jump back and talk about, well, sentence parts, because they don't know what a clause is. So you keep getting deeper and deeper. And then if they're revising things, you start changing meaning, and if you have to consider that along with the actual form, if that makes sense. All right, are you guys up for a quiz to test your own knowledge? Yes, no, raise your hand. If you're up for a quiz, raise your hand. We need to do something interactive. Nyla's up for it. Verna's up for it. So Stacy. All right. So I'm going to put the question up. And I'm going to give you guys, I'm going to time it. I'm going to give you guys about, I don't know, what's a good time? 15 seconds to start typing your answers. All right. So first question. What 3 components are necessary for a complete sentence? Ready, set, go. All right, and that's 15 seconds. Okay, you guys got the 2. Punctuation is good. That's a good one. Close. Subject, verb, and it needs to be a complete thought. Punctuation, I guess we could include. So maybe there's 4 things. All right, you guys did good on that one. All right, question number 2. This one's hard. What is the difference between a phrase and a clause? Ready, go. Okay, you guys might need more than 15 seconds for that one. Okay, you guys made a good attempt at it. This is a really hard one. This is one that I've had to look up, especially my first couple of years of teaching. I think in 15 years I've been teaching long enough that I can give you guys the answer. But this is a hard one. So, but you shouldn't. Do not feel bad, Christina, at all about not knowing these things. Because even if you have a degree in English or English education, these are not things that we are taught most of the time. You might be required to take a class in grammar. You might not. I didn't have to take a class in that. I never took one grammar class my entire 4 years of college. So by the time I started teaching, I had years without ever having given grammar a thought, and all I had was, high school worksheets. So this is something that we need to ourselves study if we're going to be effective at teaching our students. So just for the record, a phrase is a small group of words that work together as a conceptual unit, and they act as a single part of speech. So like a good example of a phrase is a prepositional phrase. A clause has a subject and a verb, and there are 2 different types of clauses, the independent and the dependent. So an independent clause is basically a simple sentence. A dependent clause is just not a complete thought. I don't know why, that kind of background is not more of a focus, because it would make a lot of sense if we as teachers had more preparation in teaching. But I also think there's a lot of things that our education programs could probably do a better job of. As a high school teacher, I didn't have to have much instruction on like literacy instruction, like how to actually help students become better readers. Because if you're teaching high school, the assumption is your kids can read already. But I still have a lot of students who really struggle to get basic meaning out of a text. And it's not till I started working on my master's degree and was trying to get an ESL certification that I actually got some methods for literacy instruction that you could apply to younger students or those that were not as far along in literacy. So this is, a problem with our education programs. So sometimes we have to, unfortunately, take it upon ourselves to do some research and do, some learning on our own. And it's hard because when do you do that? All right, you guys ready for one more question? I have quite a few of them, so how about we do one more and then we'll continue. Let me see which one I want to give you. Okay, this one is appropriate. And it happens to be number 3. Can you name 6 comma rules? Because this definitely impacts our ability to have students revise their writing. Or list as many comma rules as you can remember. Victor, you're absolutely right. A lot of teenagers do not like to read. Sometimes to get them to read, it really requires some searching for texts that can keep them interested and also challenge them. Good. Making lists is a good one. After a greeting, we can generalize the after a greeting to any kind of introductory element. So there's 2. Okay, so Shayla, I'm going to interpret your rule there to be between compound element, not compound elements, but between two independent clauses. Like if you have an and or a but or an or. Yes. Andrew, you got it. So that's 3. All right, I'm going to let these last 2 go, a couple of comments go, and then I'll give you the last 3 if we don't get them. Ah, yes, Grace, absolutely. That's a good one. And Angela, you're right, intro elements. So the last 3 that we didn't hit, we got the compound sentences, we got the items in a series. You use commas to set off unnecessary elements, so description, parenthetical comments, and appositive phrases. So if you guys are interested in refreshing or having an activity, a quick way to review comma rules with your students, I did actually include in your handouts a list of comma rules with practice sentences. All right. Verna, I agree with you. So our language instruction and how it impacts our students' writing it's really important. It's really important, and we need to look at where we are and what we can do to actually improve our instruction. So very, very true. All right, so I'm going to go through the next section that I have here is just standards, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. I'm going to pretty much jump to the writing part pretty quickly.